Hey guys, imagine living in a world where something as small as what you wore or how you sneezed could cost you your life. Sounds absurd, right? But that was medieval Europe for you, full of rules that were equal parts strict, bizarre, and terrifyingly literal. Tonight, we're diving into the weirdest medieval laws you could be killed for. And trust me, some of these laws are so strange you'll wonder how anyone survived without accidentally signing their own death warrant. Let's start with clothing. Medieval Europe was obsessed with marking social hierarchies, and one of the strangest ways they did this was through sumptuary laws. These laws dictated exactly who could wear what. Silk, velvet, certain furs, even colors like purple were reserved for nobility. Imagine being a simple peasant who just wanted to impress someone with a fancy tunic, only to discover that flaunting it could get you hanged. You'd think showing off a bit of style wouldn't be a matter of life and death. But back then, fashion was a political statement and a lethal one. And it wasn't just England. Across Europe, rules about clothing could be painfully specific. In France, there were laws against riding a horse in a mask. No one's really sure why, maybe to prevent bandits from disguising themselves. Or maybe some king just had a personal vendetta against masquerades. But if you were caught, death could follow. It makes you think twice before sneaking into a costume party, doesn't it? Food laws were another way to enforce control, often with deadly consequences. During Lent, eating meat was not just sinful, it could be a crime, punishable by death in certain regions. Monks, peasants, even merchants had to adhere strictly to these rules, surviving on fish and vegetables, while any slip-up could land you on the wrong end of a noose. Imagine craving a roast chicken after a long fast, only to be reminded that your stomach could be the death of you. Gambling laws were equally terrifying. In 15th century England, playing dice for money wasn't just frowned upon, it could earn you a death sentence. Losing at a game of chance wasn't just disappointing, it was potentially fatal. Next time you grumble over losing Monopoly or a board game, remember, at least you aren't risking your neck over it. Speech was another minefield. In a world dominated by the church, blasphemy could be a death sentence. Criticizing clergy, making jokes about sacred figures, or even uttering a sarcastic remark about the church hierarchy could send you straight to the gallows. Words carried immense weight, and a careless comment could easily become your last. In some ways, the medieval era was a place where people really needed to watch their language. Hygiene, or the medieval obsession with disease, added another layer of danger. During plague outbreaks, laws could decree that anyone knowingly carrying disease might be executed to protect the community. With limited understanding of germs, these laws were crude but deadly serious. The fear of contagion made survival a constant negotiation between caution and chaos. Then there was the matter of hunting. In England, the king and nobility claimed exclusive rights to hunt certain animals, like deer and rabbits. Poaching wasn't merely illegal, it was potentially lethal. Starving peasants who tried to catch a rabbit for dinner could face execution. It's a stark reminder that medieval justice often prioritized privilege over survival, and even a simple act of hunger could become fatal. Weapons laws were another way rulers kept power tightly in their own hands. Commoners couldn't legally possess certain swords, shields, or armor without royal permission. Being caught with unauthorized weaponry could cost you your life. It's a sobering thought. A shiny sword in the market could literally be a death sentence in disguise. Magic and witchcraft were considered dangerous enough to warrant execution. From the 13th century onward, practicing magic, casting spells, even benign charms for protection or healing, could be labeled witchcraft, and punishable by hanging or burning. Imagine your grandmother whipping up a simple herbal remedy for a cold, only to be accused of consorting with demons. In a world obsessed with superstition, even a small act of magic could become a capital offense. Marriage laws weren't immune to brutality either. In some regions, marrying without the king's approval or attempting to wed someone beneath your social rank could result in execution. Love wasn't just complicated, it could be fatal. Social hierarchy was enforced, not just with whispers or frowns, but with life or death stakes. Even small, seemingly mundane actions carried enormous risk. In some medieval towns, forgetting to close the city gates at night could earn you execution, especially if an enemy entered. That's right. A simple lapse in responsibility could become your last. It's a grim illustration of how medieval law wasn't about fairness so much as survival and control. All of these laws sound dark, funny, and absurd at the same time, The fact that a sneeze, a tunic, or a dice game could get someone executed is a reminder that medieval Europe was a world of strict hierarchy, superstition, and fear. Life was precarious, rules were often bizarre, and survival depended on knowing the unspoken and often deadly codes of the time. As we continue, we'll explore even stranger medieval laws, the kind that would make modern eyes widen in disbelief. From bizarre public behavior to peculiar prohibitions on everyday life, the medieval imagination crafted rules that were as deadly as they were ridiculous. Beyond clothing, food, and speech, medieval law had a way of turning the most ordinary behaviors into potentially lethal offenses. Take, for example, stinky crimes. Yes, being smelly could literally get you killed. In some towns, there were laws against failing to maintain personal hygiene or letting your house become a source of foul odor. The reasoning wasn't vanity. Authorities believed bad smells could spread disease or attract evil spirits. So if your home reeked of unwashed laundry, rotting food, or worse, a nosy neighbor might report you on. In extreme cases, it could lead to capital punishment. Bathing wasn't just about cleanliness, it was survival, in the oddest sense. Public behavior, too, was heavily policed. Some cities outlawed public urination or defecation under threat of death. Forget bathroom humor. Medieval towns could take this literally. The streets were narrow, densely packed, and sanitation was primitive, so laws against polluting public spaces were serious. Misstep in the wrong place could have deadly consequences. Even animals weren't safe from medieval overzealous lawmaking. In England, killing someone else's cat could be a capital crime. Cats weren't just pets. They were valued for controlling rats, which could carry plague. Killing one might seem minor, but in a world where disease and superstition overlapped, such acts were treated as threats to community, survival, and punished with surprising severity. Similarly, in other regions, laws protected farm animals like pigs and cows from harm, because they were essential to the economy. So yes, medieval justice sometimes extended to livestock, and sometimes was literally a matter of life or death. Then there were rules about sleeping arrangements. In certain towns, it was illegal for men and women to sleep in the same room outside of marriage. Breaking this rule could be treated as a serious crime, occasionally punishable by death. Think about it. Falling asleep in the wrong bed could mean the end of your story. Even a simple act like cohabiting was subjected to the harshest enforcement. Another layer of medieval weirdness involved recreational activities. For instance, archery practice wasn't just encouraged, it was often legally required for men of certain ages. Yet, failing to practice or attempting to form your own hunting club without permission could be considered rebellion against royal authority, and in extreme cases, it was punishable by death. Medieval rulers didn't just want to protect their own hunting privileges, they wanted to ensure the populace stayed ready for war. Travel was also a minefield. In some kingdoms, moving through certain areas without permission could be interpreted as espionage or rebellion. Crossing borders, taking a shortcut through a lord's land, or even lingering too long in a town could put you at risk of execution. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time wasn't just bad luck, it could be fatal. Medieval law also had its quirks when it came to maritime rules. Sailors had to follow strict codes, and breaking them could mean execution. Stealing cargo, failing to follow navigation instructions, or even attempting to desert a ship could be considered capital offenses. Life at sea was dangerous enough, without the added threat of absurdly strict laws designed to maintain order and loyalty. Even children weren't exempt from bizarre laws. In some regions, kids who stole or disobeyed authority figures could be punished harshly, sometimes with death, if the offense was considered severe enough. Medieval society didn't differentiate much between the mistakes of youth and the crimes of adults when it came to legal consequences. Survival often depended on obedience, or at least on not being caught doing anything remotely suspicious. Religion, naturally, cast a long shadow over medieval law. Beyond blasphemy, heresy holding beliefs contrary to the official church doctrine was punishable by execution. Some heretical acts were minor, like questioning a priest's teaching, but the consequences were anything but minor. Burning at the stake or hanging were common corrections for those deemed heretics. The message was clear. Obedience was literally a matter of life and death. And let's not forget about unusual marital restrictions. In some regions, laws dictated not only who you could marry, but also when and how. Marrying during forbidden periods, or attempting to marry someone considered socially inappropriate could bring about lethal punishment. Love was constrained by social hierarchy, and crossing those boundaries could make your romantic decisions fatal. Public gatherings could also be risky. Unauthorized meetings, whether political, social, or even religious, could be treated as rebellious assemblies. Authorities feared uprisings, conspiracies, and plots, so congregating without permission wasn't just risky, it could be deadly. Imagine attending what you thought was a harmless town meeting and suddenly realizing it's a capital offense to be there. In many ways, medieval law reflected a society obsessed with control, hierarchy, and order. Everything from what you wore to how you spoke, from your hygiene to your sleeping arrangements, was regulated, often with terrifying consequences. The sheer randomness of what could get you executed makes it feel like a darkly comedic nightmare. Sneezing in the wrong place, wearing silk when you shouldn't, or even letting your cat wander too far, could all be fatal. As strange as these laws were, they reveal a lot about medieval life. The constant fear of disease, the obsession with hierarchy, and the intertwining of superstition with governance. People didn't just live under laws, they lived under an ever-present threat that something seemingly trivial could end their life. It was a world where absurdity and danger were inseparable, and surviving required constant vigilance, obedience, and sometimes sheer luck. Coming up next, we'll look at some of the most bizarre punishments used to enforce these laws, things that sound more like torture theater than justice. From public humiliation to inventive executions, medieval authorities had a knack for making punishment both memorable and terrifying. Medieval laws weren't just about forbidding actions. They were reinforced with punishments so bizarre, cruel, or absurd that they almost read like a dark fairy tale. Once you broke a law, your fate wasn't merely a fine or jail time. It could be death, often delivered in a way designed to terrify everyone else. Imagine a world where the punishment was as memorable as the crime itself, sometimes even stranger. Take, for example, the punishment for counterfeiting coins. In many regions, forging money wasn't just illegal. It was considered a betrayal of the king himself. Those caught could face execution, sometimes in gruesome ways meant to make an example of them. Kings and local lords wanted to deter others, and nothing says don't try this at home like a public hanging or beheading. Coin forgery wasn't just economic crime, it was treason with a capital price tag. Then there were punishments for poaching, which could be oddly inventive. In England, a commoner caught hunting deer or rabbits without permission could be hanged, drawn, and quartered. It sounds medievally theatrical, because it literally was. The king's forest laws weren't just about protecting game, they were about asserting dominance. If you valued your life, sneaking into the forest for food wasn't worth the risk. Religious crimes had their own brand of macabre creativity. Heresy and witchcraft could lead to burning at the stake, a punishment designed to scare the community and purify the sinner's soul, or so they claimed. Even minor acts of witchcraft, like making a protective charm for crops, could end this way. It's a reminder that in medieval Europe, fear of the supernatural could literally shape law and punishment. Blasphemy, another common crime, often came with public humiliation before execution. People could be paraded through the streets in shame, sometimes forced to wear signs detailing their crime, before facing the ultimate penalty. The medieval justice system loved spectacle. Laws weren't just about deterrence, they were a form of social theater. If someone sneezed at the wrong time, insulted a priest, or wore silk when forbidden, the world needed to see the consequences. Even for minor offenses, punishments could be disproportionately harsh. In some cities, failing to maintain proper sanitation could earn you public flogging or worse. Smelly houses or unclean streets weren't just nuisances, they were considered threats to the community's health and moral order. Law enforcement didn't mess around when it came to hygiene. Sexual crimes or breaches of marital law often carried unique penalties. Cohabiting without marriage, committing adultery, or even being suspected of fornication could lead to public shaming, mutilation, or execution. Authorities weren't subtle about enforcing morality. Sometimes, the spectacle itself was meant to instill fear in the populace. Imagine living in a town where a simple romantic decision could put your life on the line. Every glance, every whispered relationship was under scrutiny. And then there were punishments for speech crimes, like blasphemy or heresy. Execution methods varied, depending on the severity of the offense and the whims of local rulers. Hanging was common, but burning at the stake, beheadings, and even being drawn and quartered, were used for more serious offenders. Medieval rulers had a flair for making law enforcement both terrifying and memorable. Words were taken seriously, and in a society ruled by religion and hierarchy, they could kill. Animal-related crimes sometimes received punishments just as bizarre. For example, a person caught killing someone else's cat could face severe penalties, sometimes death, depending on the local laws. Cats were valued not just as companions, but as protectors against rats and disease. Similarly, harming livestock like cows, pigs, or horses was punished severely because it threatened the local economy. Medieval law treated animals with surprising seriousness, sometimes lethally. One of the strangest punishments involved unauthorized masquerades or wearing a mask on horseback. In France, riding a horse while masked could earn you execution, though records are vague on why this law existed. Some historians speculate it was to prevent banditry, while others think it was about controlling public behavior or limiting what they considered frivolous displays. Either way, the punishment, execution, remains a darkly humorous reminder of medieval arbitrary. Punishments also extended to games and recreation. Gambling, like playing dice for money, wasn't just illegal, it could be deadly. Those caught were sometimes executed to serve as a warning to others. Medieval rulers wanted to maintain control over leisure as well as work. Entertainment was never purely innocent. A simple game of chance could become a life-or-death gamble. Even the most mundane failures, like forgetting to close a city gate, could carry extreme consequences. In fortified towns, letting enemies slip in through negligence was considered treason. A small mistake, a gate left open, could be your last. It's a reminder that medieval law wasn't just about morality. It was about survival, hierarchy, and the appearance of order. Weirdly specific laws sometimes led to unusual punishments. For instance, sumptuary laws, the rules about who could wear what, was sometimes enforced with public humiliation, fines, or corporal punishment. Breaking these rules might seem silly today, but they reinforced social hierarchy and reminded everyone of their place. Nobles could flaunt wealth, peasants could not, and the law ensured everyone knew it, sometimes fatally so. Medieval justice could also be inventive in terrifying ways. Those accused of treason, heresy, or rebellion were sometimes subjected to slow, public, or symbolic punishments designed to demonstrate the ruler's power. Breaking the law wasn't just about punishment. It was about spectacle, control, and fear. Even the smallest acts, if interpreted as threatening the established order, could lead to a creative and gruesome execution. In short, medieval punishments were a combination of fear, theatrics, and morality enforcement. Whether it was hanging, burning, public shaming, or mutilation, the laws ensured that everyone knew the consequences of stepping out of line. Life wasn't just precarious, it was a constant negotiation between survival, obedience, and luck. And sometimes, the line between a minor offense and a capital crime was almost invisible. Next, we'll explore some truly absurd medieval laws that seem completely divorced from reason. From sneezing in public to wearing certain colors or eating forbidden foods, these rules highlight just how strange and arbitrary medieval life could be. We'll see that the medieval imagination didn't just enforce survival, it often veered into the ridiculous, darkly humorous, and shockingly strict. Now, let's wander into the truly absurd side of medieval law, the kind of rules that make you squint at history and ask, wait, people were actually executed for this. Some laws were so ridiculous, they're almost funny. If you ignore the fact that someone's life was on the line. Take sneezing, for example. In parts of medieval Europe, it wasn't just polite to cover your mouth, it was legally required, or at least, failing to do so could lead to punishment if authorities considered it a threat to public health. Sneezing in public during plague outbreaks, for instance, could be interpreted as spreading disease intentionally. While you probably wouldn't face execution for a sneeze today, back then, one tiny expulsion of air might be treated as a deadly offense. Colors, too, could be fatal. Remember the sumptuary laws we mentioned earlier? Wearing purple, a color reserved for royalty, could get you executed in some regions. Silk, gold thread, or even luxurious furs weren't just fashion statements, they were declarations of status. Peasants or merchants who ignored these rules weren't just showing off, they were literally risking their lives. Imagine walking into a market, feeling proud of your new outfit, and suddenly realizing it's a capital offense. Food choices were another area where absurdity reigned. Eating meat during forbidden periods, like Lent, was considered a crime in some parts of Europe, punishable by death. Meanwhile, eating fish or vegetables was safe, but not necessarily enjoyable. Breaking dietary law wasn't just a religious faux pas, it was a potential execution-level offense. You could think of it as the medieval version of you are what you eat, and if you cheat, you die. Then there were odd public behavior laws. In France, riding a horse while wearing a mask was a crime punishable by death. Historians aren't entirely sure why, but speculation ranges from preventing disguised bandits to limiting frivolous masquerade culture. Either way, this law demonstrates that medieval authorities didn't just regulate morality or survival, they sometimes regulated fun, too, with lethal consequences. Gambling laws were equally harsh. Playing dice for money could get you executed, even if you were just having a harmless game with friends. Losing a roll wasn't just disappointing, it could be fatal. Medieval rulers wanted to curb gambling, perhaps fearing rebellion or deed-related chaos, but their enforcement was extreme. Life was a gamble in more ways than one, and some players lost everything, permanently. Hygiene laws could also be deadly. In some towns, failing to maintain a clean home or body wasn't just frowned upon, it could be punished severely. Bad smells were associated with disease, moral decay, or divine punishment. People who didn't wash, clean, or properly dispose of waste could be reported to authorities, and in extreme circumstances, this could result in execution. The medieval obsession with hygiene might sound strange now, but it shows how survival, superstition, and law often intertwined. Marriage laws were another surprisingly dangerous area. Marrying without royal permission, attempting to wed beneath your social status, or even eloping could be considered crimes punishable by execution. Love wasn't just complicated, it was regulated by law, hierarchy, and sometimes lethal prejudice. People didn't just risk heartbreak, they risked death. Let's not forget about speech. Blasphemy and heresy could earn you a slow, painful death. Questioning a priest, mocking a sacred figure, or spreading heretical ideas might seem minor today, but medieval authorities took such offenses seriously. Public execution served as both punishment and warning, ensuring that words, jokes, or critiques carried real weight. In a society ruled by religion, saying the wrong thing could be fatal. Even animals were part of the law's weird, lethal reach. Killing someone else's cat or livestock could be punishable by death, depending on local regulations. Cats were valued for keeping rats away, while livestock represented wealth and survival. Medieval justice treated these animals as extensions of human property, and violating that property could cost you your life. In essence, medieval Europe was a world where absurdity and lethality often walked hand in hand. Sneezing, dressing in the wrong color, gambling, eating meat during Lent, or even leaving your gate open could turn a normal day into a life-or-death affair. The laws were strict, sometimes nonsensical, and often terrifyingly literal. Survival depended not only on obedience, but also on constant vigilance, and frankly, a bit of luck. Up next, we'll dive into the most shocking, bizarre crimes that actually existed on the books, those that seem stranger than fiction, yet were fully enforceable in medieval times. From odd rituals to strange social taboos, these laws reveal a world where danger lurked in the smallest, funniest, and most unexpected corners of life. As bizarre as medieval laws already sound, some of the actual crimes people were executed for take absurdity to a whole new level. These weren't minor infractions, they were behaviors, habits, or even accidents that somehow ended up on the books as capital offenses. And yet, history tells us people really did face the ultimate punishment for them. Take witches and magic, for instance. While we've touched on this before, the sheer range of acts considered criminal is astonishing. It wasn't just casting harmful spells. Even making charms to protect crops or heal someone could be construed as witchcraft. People accused of maleficium, literally, doing evil magic, could be hanged, drowned, or burned. In some cases, accusations were based entirely on rumor, fear, or personal vendettas. Imagine being an herbalist with a good reputation, only for a neighbor to claim your potion is evil, and suddenly your life is on the line. Then there were the oddities surrounding food and drink. In some medieval towns, there were laws that punished bakers, brewers, or sellers for producing the wrong food or drink, using unauthorized ingredients, baking bread too small, or selling ale considered impure. In extreme circumstances, lead to execution. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a moral and legal matter. Every loaf of bread or pint of ale carried the potential to offend the law and cost a life. Animals often made the law books in the strangest ways. In medieval France, a man could theoretically be executed for injuring someone's horse, even if accidentally. Horses were incredibly valuable transportation, work, and wealth, all rolled into one living asset. Losing a horse to negligence or cruelty wasn't just a financial problem, it was a legal threat. Cats, pigs, cows, and even bees had protections, because medieval life depended heavily on these creatures. Harm one, and you could be in deadly trouble. Public behavior was another minefield. Certain towns had laws punishing people for laughing too loudly, singing the wrong song, or dancing at improper times. The reasoning: maintaining order, moral discipline, or religious decorum. Break the rules, and you risked more than embarrassment. Medieval authorities took public behavior seriously and, sometimes lethally. Clothing laws also produced bizarre consequences. Wearing a noble exclusive color or fabric wasn't just illegal. Flaunting it could lead to public execution. The law wasn't just about status, it was about demonstrating absolute social control. Imagine showing up at a market in silk and gold and suddenly realizing that your fashion sense might be your last statement. Then there were punishments linked to physical accidents. Forgetting to close a gate could be fatal, as we mentioned, but so could minor negligence elsewhere. Dropping a tool that damaged a neighbor's property, letting livestock wander, or even accidentally injuring someone in a public space could escalate into capital punishment, depending on local laws. Life in medieval towns demanded vigilance in even the smallest actions. Marriage and sex were fraught with danger too. In some regions, even being suspected of impropriety could lead to death. Cohabitation, outside marriage, adultery, or eloping without permission could result in execution. Love and desire weren't just private matters, they were tightly regulated by law, social hierarchy, and sometimes lethal prejudice. Every personal choice had the potential to be legally fatal. Even playing games wasn't always safe. Gambling, dice, or unauthorized tournaments could land you in serious trouble. Authorities wanted to control recreation, prevent rebellion, and maintain public order. If a game of chance disrupted that order, execution could follow. Leisure wasn't innocent. It was potentially lethal. And let's not forget hygiene again. People could be punished, sometimes fatally, for letting their homes or bodies become dirty. Smells weren't just unpleasant, they were seen as dangerous, capable of spreading disease or attracting evil spirits. Medieval society conflated cleanliness with morality and law enforcement, and failure could be a capital offense. The pattern is clear. In medieval Europe, survival wasn't just about avoiding illness or enemies. It was about obeying countless rules, many of which seem completely arbitrary today. Sneezing, dressing in the wrong color, playing a dice game, leaving a gate open, or brewing the wrong ale could all carry the death penalty. Life was a careful negotiation of obedience, superstition, hierarchy, and luck. Next, we'll explore some of the most infamous cases where these laws were enforced, showing the shocking real-life consequences of breaking absurd medieval rules. From minor infractions to bizarre accusations, these stories reveal just how strange and dangerous life really was in the Middle Ages. Let's step into the stories behind the laws, the real cases, where people actually faced the ultimate punishment for absurd reasons. These examples reveal a medieval world where life was precarious, rules were strict, and consequences could be shocking, horrifying, or downright bizarre. Take the case of Alice Keitler, an Irish woman accused of witchcraft in the early 14th century. Alice was wealthy, independent, and successful, a rare combination for a woman in medieval Ireland. Her neighbors accused her of using sorcery to harm others, and the church authorities took it seriously. Alice herself fled, avoiding execution, but her servant wasn't so lucky. Petty accusations, rumors, and fear of the supernatural combined to create a legal nightmare where mere suspicion could kill. Alice's story illustrates how medieval laws around witchcraft were not only strict but terrifyingly personal. In England, there are recorded cases of poachers being executed for hunting rabbits or deer. The forest laws weren't just about protecting wildlife, they were about power. Kings and nobles wanted to assert their dominance, and death sentences were meant to reinforce that hierarchy. Peasants who were starving often had no choice but to risk hunting forbidden animals, and the stakes were literal. The law transformed survival into a gamble, where a wrong step could mean your last meal and your last breath. Food laws also led to deadly consequences. During Lent, eating meat was a crime in some regions. Monks, peasants, and merchants alike were expected to abstain, and violations could lead to execution. One anecdote tells of a merchant in France who, caught selling forbidden meat, faced the grim consequence of law enforcement that viewed sin and crime as intertwined. Medieval authorities treated dietary infractions not just as moral failings, but as offenses deserving the harshest punishment. Then there are the bizarre cases of clothing violations. In England, the sumptuary laws punished peasants who dared to wear silk or velvet, reserved only for the nobility. Public execution could follow, turning fashion into a life-or-death matter. Imagine a young peasant excited about a new tunic, only to be reminded that style was strictly regulated and disobedience could be fatal. These laws weren't just absurd, they were deadly serious. Religious law produced even stranger cases. Heresy trials in the 14th and 15th centuries could hinge on the most trivial details. In some towns, questioning a priest's teachings or holding unapproved religious ideas could lead to execution. People were burned at the stake, hanged, or otherwise punished publicly. The goal wasn't just enforcement, it was spectacle, warning the population that words, beliefs, or skepticism could cost them everything. Even public hygiene led to real danger. In some medieval cities, authorities punished residents for failing to clean their homes, streets, or public areas. Smells were considered a threat to health, morality, and order. While records of execution, specifically for bad odor, are scarce, fines, beatings, and harsh punishment were real consequences. The law treated cleanliness as survival, morality, and obedience all at once. Then there were truly odd public behavior cases. In parts of France, riding a horse while masked could result in execution. One can only imagine a traveler or entertainer thinking they were being playful or fashionable, only to learn that the authorities viewed their mask as a threat or, at least as a crime deserving the ultimate punishment. The absurdity is striking, but in a medieval context, it was deadly serious. Gambling crimes also led to lethal consequences. Playing dice for money, even casually, could result in execution in 15th century England. Records tell of small communities where dice players were publicly punished to prevent disorder. Leisure wasn't safe. Rolling a die might seem innocent, but in medieval eyes, it could signal rebellion, debt, or immorality, and sometimes death. Marriage and cohabitation laws also saw real enforcement. Couples who lived together without royal permission, or attempted to marry beneath their social status, faced fines, public shaming, or even execution. Love and desire were tightly controlled by law and hierarchy. A romantic decision, made in private, could have shocking, public, and lethal consequences. Finally, let's not forget minor negligence. Forgetting to close city gates, letting livestock wander, or accidentally injuring someone could escalate into serious punishment. Death sentences weren't always about deliberate wrongdoing. Sometimes, they were about risk, responsibility, and maintaining order. Life was a careful negotiation of laws, obligations, and luck. These historical cases show that medieval laws weren't just abstract rules, they were lived experiences, often terrifying and sometimes absurd. Sneezing, dressing in the wrong color, gambling, or even brewing the wrong food could literally kill. Survival demanded obedience, vigilance, and a sense of humor, though often the humor came too late. Medieval Europe loved rules. Sometimes they were practical, often they were moral, and occasionally they were utterly absurd. As we move deeper into the weirdest laws, it becomes clear that the Middle Ages were a place where reality often seemed stranger than fiction. And yes, some of these absurd laws were punishable by death. Take sneezing in public, for example. While it might sound harmless today, during plague outbreaks, authorities sometimes treated uncontrolled sneezing as a dangerous act. It wasn't about rudeness, it was about fear. If you sneezed near others, it could be seen as spreading disease intentionally. In extreme cases, authorities responded with lethal consequences. A sneeze wasn't just polite or impolite, it could be deadly. Then there were laws surrounding clothing, which were both strict and ridiculous. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what, and colors carried deadly weight. Purple was for royalty only, and wearing it without permission could mean execution. The same went for luxurious fabrics like silk or velvet. Clothing wasn't just fashion, It was a visible declaration of social status. Step out of line, and it wasn't a fine, it could be your last day on earth. Food laws were equally absurd. Eating meat during forbidden periods like Lent could get you executed in certain regions. Selling the wrong food or brewing the wrong ale could also be punished severely. Medieval authorities weren't just concerned about morality, they were obsessed with control. Every meal could carry risk if it violated law, custom, or religious timing. Public behavior was another area full of lethal absurdities. In some towns, riding a horse while masked was illegal and punishable by death. Why? Possibly to prevent crime or public disorder, but historians still debate the reasoning. Regardless, a masked rider could find themselves facing execution simply for enjoying a costume or traveling incognito. Gambling, too, was a dangerous pastime. Playing dice for money wasn't just illegal, it could be punished with execution. A small board game could spiral into a life or death gamble, turning leisure into a high-stakes affair. Medieval rulers clearly believed that controlling play was as important as controlling work or obedience. Hygiene laws also had absurdly severe consequences. Failing to keep your home, streets, or public areas clean could lead to punishments ranging from fines to public humiliation and, in extreme interpretations, even execution. Smells weren't just unpleasant, they were associated with disease, divine displeasure, and moral failure. In the medieval mind, neglecting hygiene could endanger both life and soul. Marriage and cohabitation laws were equally extreme. Couples who tried to live together outside of marriage, or wed without permission, could face execution or severe punishment. Love wasn't just complicated, it was regulated, monitored, and sometimes lethal. Every personal choice had potential consequences, far beyond heartbreak or scandal. Speech and belief were tightly controlled as well. Blasphemy and heresy were punishable by death, sometimes in dramatic and public ways. Questioning religious authority, mocking a sacred figure, or even spreading incorrect ideas could lead to burning, hanging, or worse. Words weren't just words, they carried the weight of life and death. Even minor negligence could be deadly. Forgetting to close city gates, letting livestock wander, or accidentally injuring someone could escalate into severe punishment. Life in medieval towns demanded constant vigilance, and failure even accidental could be fatal. The laws were strict, sometimes absurd, and often terrifyingly literal. Then there were animal laws. Harming someone else's cat, pig, cow, or horse could be punishable by death, because these animals were essential to survival, agriculture, or commerce. Medieval justice treated animals as extensions of human property, and violating that property could cost a life. Some punishments were oddly theatrical. For breaking sumptuary laws, public humiliation sometimes preceded execution. Authorities used spectacle to enforce obedience, turning punishment into a warning to the community. Medieval law wasn't just about justice, it was about teaching, controlling, and terrifying the populace. Altogether, these absurd laws paint a picture of medieval life that's both darkly humorous and chilling. Sneezing, dressing in the wrong color, gambling, leaving a gate open, or even riding a horse while masked could all be punishable by death. Life required obedience, vigilance, and sometimes a sense of humor, though often the humor came too late. As we move deeper into medieval Europe, one thing becomes startlingly clear. Superstition wasn't just a belief, it was law. Fears of witches, demons, and divine wrath shaped rules that were as bizarre as they were deadly. Life was precarious not only because of kings or nobles, but because the invisible world of spirits, curses, and omens could decide your fate. Take witches, for instance. Accusations of witchcraft weren't reserved for malicious magic alone. In some cases, simply being unlucky or having unusual knowledge could earn suspicion. Women who brewed potions to heal, midwives who assisted childbirth, or anyone dabbling in herbal remedies could be accused. The punishment, often death, usually by hanging or burning. In a society that equated misfortune with malevolent magic, survival sometimes meant hiding your skills or knowledge, or keeping neighbors on your good side. Demons were another serious concern. Medieval laws often criminalized actions thought to invite demonic influence. Chanting spells, practicing charms, or even attempting to ward off evil could be treated as evidence of consorting with dark forces. The reasoning might seem strange now, but at the time, fear of the supernatural permeated every aspect of life. Laws weren't just rules, they were shields against imagined threats, Some towns and villages had laws specifically targeting suspected witches, with severe punishments meant to serve as public warnings. Accusations could stem from personal grudges, jealousy, or simple fear. Once accused, proving innocence was nearly impossible. The judicial process was deeply intertwined with superstition. Confessions were often extracted under torture, and verdicts favored the community's fear over evidence. One wrong look, one strange act, and you could face execution. Superstition also intersected with daily habits. Owning certain animals, performing unusual rituals, or even possessing herbs could be construed as witchcraft or demon worship. Cats, owls, or black animals, sometimes considered omens, could make their owners suspects. It was a world where ordinary life could be misread as evil, and misinterpretation could be fatal. Even weather played a role. Accusations sometimes arose after storms or crop failures, as people sought someone to blame. Laws against causing misfortune through magic could be applied loosely, punishing innocent people for natural disasters. If your neighbor's wheat failed, it might not just be bad luck, it could be your fault. Legally speaking, religion amplified these fears. The church's influence meant that many crimes were spiritual as well as legal offenses. Blasphemy, heresy, or failing to follow rituals correctly could be treated with execution. Some punishments were public, designed to scare others into compliance. The line between moral sin, spiritual error, and legal crime was thin, sometimes invisible. Even mundane acts could trigger suspicion. Brewing beer, keeping herbs for healing, or owning forbidden books might seem harmless today, but in medieval times, they could mark someone as dangerous. Authorities often treated knowledge, independence, or unusual behavior as threats to social and spiritual order. Survival often meant blending in, concealing skills, and avoiding attention. Superstition also shaped punishments in uniquely terrifying ways. Public executions weren't just about killing the accused, they were warning spectacles. Burning, hanging, or mutilation served as lessons to the entire community. Step out of line, dabble in magic, or attract suspicion, and you could meet a gruesome fate. Life was precarious, not just from law or rulers, but from neighbors, omens, and unseen forces. Some of the most absurd cases involved omens and portents. Seeing a black cat, hearing an unusual sound, or performing an uncommon ritual could be interpreted as evidence of witchcraft or bad luck. Medieval authorities weren't just enforcing laws, they were codifying fear. Everyday life was a tightrope. A wrong glance, a strange habit, or simple misfortune could put your life at risk. The combination of superstition and law meant that medieval Europe was a place where the invisible world dictated the visible one. Witches, demons, bad luck, and omens weren't just fears, they were enforceable threats. The boundaries between reality and imagination were blurred, and sometimes, imagining the wrong thing or acting in a slightly unusual way could be deadly. As strange as these laws were, they reveal a society struggling to understand the world around them. With limited science, pervasive religion, and intense social hierarchies, fear became codified into law, and absurdity became lethal. Sneezes, colored clothes, cats, herbs, and even storms could all influence legal outcomes and sometimes result in execution. Next, we'll explore the weirdest, funniest, and most shocking public behaviors that were illegal. From dancing and singing, to laughing at the wrong time. These laws highlight how medieval authorities tried to control not only life and death, but even joy and expression. Medieval authorities didn't just regulate survival, they also tried to control behavior, expression, and even joy. Some of the strangest laws targeted everyday actions that we now consider harmless or even fun. And yes, breaking these laws could sometimes carry extreme consequences. Take dancing, for example. In certain regions, dancing at the wrong time or in the wrong place could be illegal. Why? Authorities worried about disorder, immoral gatherings, or even demonic influence. Dancing wasn't merely leisure, it was a potential threat to social and moral order. In extreme cases, defying these rules could lead to punishment. And though execution wasn't always guaranteed, fines, humiliation, or public beating were common. It's easy to imagine villagers tiptoeing through life, terrified that a joyful jig could land them in trouble. Laughing in the wrong context was another hazard. Some laws dictated how and when people could laugh. Laugh too loudly, too often, or at the wrong moment, and you could be accused of disrupting public order, or worse. Humor wasn't just personal, it was regulated. A joke could make you a target, especially if authorities suspected it challenged hierarchy, religion, or local custom. Singing was treated with similar caution. Certain songs, tunes, or lyrics could be interpreted as rebellious, blasphemous, or morally corrupting. Performers risked fines, imprisonment, or harsher penalties depending on the perceived severity. Entertainment wasn't just fun, it was a political and moral minefield. Every note carried weight, even gestures and manners could become lethal. Waving, pointing, or making what seemed like harmless signals could be interpreted as insults or threats, particularly if directed toward nobility or clergy. Social awareness wasn't just polite, it was survival. One misread gesture could escalate into punishment. In some cities, holding public gatherings without permission could be punished severely, whether it was a market meeting, a religious assembly, or a casual community event. Unauthorized gatherings were seen as potential seeds of rebellion. Medieval rulers were paranoid about disorder, and enforcement was often extreme. What we'd call a harmless meet could become a capital offense in the wrong context. Street behavior was also tightly policed. Spitting in public, arguing, or even simply loitering could attract legal attention. Medieval towns treated social order as a matter of life and death. Offenders might face fines, public humiliation, or corporal punishment, and occasionally execution if authorities deemed it serious enough. Even seemingly innocent animals could be involved in these social rules. Keeping pets that wandered into other spaces, allowing chickens or pigs to roam freely, or failing to control animals in public could escalate into legal trouble. Animal misbehavior was treated as a reflection of the owner's control and morality, and sometimes threatened their life. Marriage and social status continued to intersect with public behavior. Couples behaving inappropriately, flouting hierarchy, or breaking social norms could face serious consequences. Medieval law extended into private relationships because personal actions were always seen as connected to social stability. Love, intimacy, and public conduct weren't just private matters, they were potential legal risks. Humor, too, could be dangerous. Mocking authority, joking about clergy, or making light of sacred traditions could result in fines, imprisonment, or execution. In a society where words carried immense weight, what we'd consider harmless teasing could be fatal. People had to navigate not only rules but also social expectations shaped by religion, hierarchy, and superstition. Even leisure was regulated. Playing games, gambling, or forming small communities of friends or enthusiasts could be seen as subversive. Authorities didn't just control life, they controlled joy, play, and entertainment. This meant that everyday pleasures could, in extreme cases, put your life at risk. Altogether, these laws reveal a medieval world where behavior, expression, and even happiness were tightly controlled. Dancing, laughing, singing, and gesturing, ordinary human acts, could be risky. Survival wasn't just about obeying life or death rules. It was about navigating a social landscape where the smallest misstep could have dramatic consequences. Next, we'll explore the strangest recorded executions and punishments, including real cases of people punished for dancing, singing, or other seemingly harmless behaviors. These stories highlight how absurdity and danger coexisted in medieval life, keeping the population both obedient and terrified. Now, let's dive into some real cases where medieval laws met reality, and the results were often shocking, absurd, and darkly fascinating. These are the stories of people punished, sometimes executed, for behaviors that today would seem completely harmless. One of the strangest examples comes from France, where a man was accused of riding a horse while wearing a mask. At first glance, it seems almost comedic, but authorities treated it as a serious crime, possibly linked to fears of disguised criminals or public disorder. While the exact outcome of his case is unclear, the law was clear. Masked riders were breaking the rules, and the punishment could be severe. In a world where authority demanded visibility and obedience, hiding your face could be deadly. Dancing and singing could also have dire consequences. In certain medieval towns, people accused of performing dances that were immoral or inciting disorder could face fines, imprisonment, or worse. Records describe public spectacles where dancers were punished, sometimes even executed, to ensure that the populace understood the law. Music and movement weren't just entertainment, they were monitored, regulated, and potentially lethal. Even laughter could be risky. In some regions, People who laughed at the wrong time or in the wrong context were accused of disrespecting authority or moral order. Public punishment ranged from humiliation to execution, depending on the circumstances and the perceived threat to societal stability. Humor, in medieval eyes, was dangerous when misapplied. Then there were the notorious cases of sumptuary law enforcement. Peasants wearing fabrics or colors reserved for nobility could be punished publicly, sometimes with severe consequences. One story tells of a young merchant executed for wearing silk. His crime: displaying wealth he was not entitled to. Fashion wasn't just about vanity, it was about social order. Step out of line, and your outfit could literally get you killed. Hygiene and cleanliness laws also produced real punishments. In medieval towns, authorities could fine, publicly shame, or beat residents for dirty homes or personal neglect, while execution for filth was rare. Historical records indicate that in extreme interpretations, failure to maintain hygiene could be fatal. Smell was a serious matter. It was linked to disease, moral failure, and social obligation. Food laws, too, created deadly stakes. Eating meat during forbidden periods, brewing the wrong ale, or selling prohibited ingredients could result in punishment, and in some regions, execution. One 14th century account describes a merchant who was prosecuted for selling non-permitted meat during Lent, emphasizing how intertwined law, morality, and survival had become. Medieval authorities treated diet not as a personal choice, but as a matter of life, death, and divine compliance. Religious crimes continued to dominate legal consequences. People accused of heresy, blasphemy, or heretical practices were often executed publicly. Stories of burning at the stake, hanging, or other grim punishments abound, reminding the population that questioning religious authority or challenging sacred norms could end your life. Words, beliefs, and even private thoughts could be grounds for capital punishment. Animals were also central to some bizarre cases. Killing someone else's cat or livestock could lead to severe punishment, because these creatures were vital for survival. One record details a man executed for accidentally harming a neighbor's cow, emphasizing how medieval law treated animals as extensions of property and violations as potentially fatal crimes. Even minor negligence could escalate into deadly consequences. Forgetting to close a gate, allowing livestock to escape, or accidentally injuring someone could, in certain circumstances, result in execution. Life required constant attention, vigilance, and careful navigation of both legal and social rules. A momentary lapse could be your last. Altogether, these stories reveal a world where absurdity and danger were inseparable. Riding a horse in a mask, dancing too freely, laughing too loudly, wearing silk, sneezing, or simply being unlucky could all become matters of life and death. Survival depended not just on obeying rules, but on understanding an often bewildering web of law, superstition, hierarchy, and social expectation. Next, we'll explore the strangest medieval criminal trials, focusing on the bizarre charges and executions that left historians shaking their heads. These cases are perfect for bedtime storytelling. They're dark, strange, and sometimes even darkly funny, all while illustrating just how precarious life could be in the Middle Ages. Medieval criminal trials were something else entirely. They weren't just about guilt or innocence. They were often theatrical, absurd, and terrifying, with punishments designed to shock the community and reinforce obedience. In many ways, trials themselves were a performance, a mix of law, superstition, and dark drama. Take the case of Perkin Warbeck, a pretender to the English throne in the late 15th century. Though this isn't a weird law in the traditional sense, it demonstrates the absurdity of medieval justice. His mere claim, without any action, was treated as treason. Treason was punishable by hanging, drawing, and quartering, a brutal spectacle intended to deter others. The trial wasn't just about proving guilt, it was about maintaining fear, hierarchy, and authority. Then there were cases driven by superstition. Consider witch trials, which were especially common in Germany, France, and England. People could be accused based on rumor, envy, or simply being different. Trials often involved torture to extract confessions, and evidence could include anything from a strange birthmark to a neighbor's bad luck. Executions were public and horrific, often by hanging or burning. These trials were less about justice and more about control, ensuring everyone in the community understood the consequences of standing out, whether through magic, knowledge, or even personality. Animal-related crimes also led to strange trials. In France and Switzerland, there are recorded cases of animals being put on trial. Pigs, cows, and even insects could be summoned to court for harming humans or damaging crops. Lawyers would sometimes represent the animals, and punishments ranged from fines to execution. While it sounds absurd today, these trials were part of a broader medieval worldview in which law applied to all creatures, reflecting both moral order and social hierarchy. Public behavior trials were equally bizarre. People could be prosecuted for laughing too loudly, dancing improperly, or performing songs considered immoral. Punishments ranged from fines to public humiliation, and in extreme cases, execution. These trials were designed as social lessons. Step out of line, even in joy or expression, and you might pay the ultimate price. Entertainment wasn't just fun. It was a regulated act with legal consequences. Marriage and sexual trials also demonstrate the strange logic of medieval law. Couples could be prosecuted for living together without permission or attempting to marry outside their social class. Punishments ranged from public shaming to execution, emphasizing the authorities' obsession with controlling social hierarchy. Love wasn't private, it was a legal matter, with deadly stakes. Even minor infractions could lead to trials with shocking outcomes. Forgetting to close a city gate, allowing livestock to wander, or accidentally harming someone could result in legal proceedings, fines, and sometimes execution. Medieval authorities treated negligence as a threat to social order, and the courtroom was where consequences were made public. Religious trials, particularly for heresy or blasphemy, were among the most dramatic. Public confessions were extracted, often under torture, and punishments were designed to be spectacular. Burning at the stake, hanging, or mutilation served as warnings, ensuring that the community saw what happened when someone questioned authority or religious orthodoxy. Words, beliefs, and gestures carried weight, and trials were a deadly reminder. Even trivial-seeming acts like selling the wrong food, wearing the wrong color, or keeping forbidden animals could result in legal action. Medieval judges weren't necessarily unreasonable. They were enforcing a world shaped by superstition, hierarchy, and rigid social order. But by modern standards, these trials often seem absurd, arbitrary, and harshly punitive. In some of the most bizarre examples, trials were designed purely for spectacle. Executions were public, dramatic, and gruesome, turning punishment into a theatrical warning. Medieval society understood the law as both deterrent and performance. Witnessing punishment was meant to impress obedience and fear upon the population. Altogether, medieval trials show us a world where absurdity, superstition, and control were intertwined with justice. People weren't just punished for breaking laws, they were punished for being different, unlucky, or socially out of place. The line between guilt and arbitrary accusation was thin, and the consequences were often horrifying. Next, we'll explore medieval punishments in detail, from gruesome executions to absurd public spectacles, illustrating the full creativity and cruelty of enforcement. These examples are perfect for bedtime storytelling, dark, immersive, and impossible to forget. Medieval punishments were as creative as they were terrifying. They weren't just about retribution, they were also meant to instill fear and obedience. Public executions were performances, carefully designed to remind everyone that breaking the law, however absurd or minor, could be deadly. Take hanging, drawing, and quartering, a punishment reserved for traitors in England. The condemned would first be dragged to the execution site, hanged until near death, then disemboweled and beheaded, with their body cut into 4 pieces. It was gruesome, horrifying, and terrifyingly effective as a public warning. Imagine the tension in the crowd, realizing that defying authority could result in this spectacle. Burning at the stake was another common method, often used for heretics and accused witches. The accused would be tied to a stake, surrounded by wood, and set ablaze. This punishment wasn't just lethal, it was symbolic, intended to purge evil from the community and make a statement about divine justice. People watched these executions as both entertainment and moral lesson, blending fear with fascination. Then there were punishments designed to humiliate before death. Public shaming, whipping, and parading the condemned through the streets were common. Authorities understood that humiliation reinforced obedience. Sometimes, after hours of public disgrace, the individual would face execution. Medieval law was as much about social control as it was about punishment. Some punishments were almost absurdly symbolic. For example, certain criminals were hung with weights or iron collars, limiting movement and marking them visibly as offenders before execution. Others were placed in cages or gibbeted, left hanging in public for days or weeks as a warning to all who passed. The line between punishment and public spectacle was intentionally blurred. Animal trials also had their dramatic punishments. Animals found guilty of crimes were sometimes executed publicly, drowned, or mutilated. In these cases, the execution wasn't just about justice. It was also a lesson in morality and control, reminding humans that even creatures were subject to order. Even the absurd laws we've discussed, like dancing, laughing, or wearing forbidden colors, could lead to gruesome punishments if authorities chose to enforce them. A peasant wearing silk might face public humiliation followed by execution, a dramatic spectacle designed to reinforce social hierarchy. Life in medieval towns wasn't just dangerous, it was theatrical. Food-related crimes could also result in punishment. Selling non-permitted meat or brewing forbidden ale might lead to fines, public shaming, or, in extreme cases, execution. Medieval law didn't see diet as trivial. It was intertwined with morality, survival, and divine compliance. Breaking these rules could make an innocent meal a deadly mistake. Superstition played a massive role in punishments. Witches, heretics, and those accused of magic were often tortured before execution, with authorities believing that extracting confessions revealed truth and purified society. Methods included stretching, pressing, and other painful techniques. Confession wasn't just admission of guilt, it was a ritual to maintain social and spiritual order. Public behavior infractions were punished similarly. Laugh too loud, dance too freely, or sing a song considered immoral, and you could face whipping, stocks, or even execution. Authorities combined humiliation with deterrence, making examples out of minor offenders to ensure social control. Even negligence carried extreme consequences. Failing to close a city gate, losing livestock, or accidentally harming someone could lead to fines, humiliation, or execution. Medieval society treated vigilance and obedience as essential. One misstep could spiral into fatal punishment. Ultimately, medieval punishments were about control, fear, and spectacle. They enforced obedience, reinforced social hierarchies, and dramatized consequences. Absurd laws, whether about sneezing, fashion, food, or public behavior, could be enforced with lethal creativity, making daily life precarious and unpredictable. Next, we'll explore the weirdest legal loopholes and exceptions, showing how some medieval people cleverly navigated absurd laws or fell victim to them in unexpected ways. These examples highlight the clever, tragic, and sometimes funny sides of life under medieval law, even in a world full of strict, bizarre, and sometimes deadly laws. Clever people found ways to navigate, bend, or exploit the system. Medieval law wasn't always perfectly enforced, and some individuals used loopholes or sheer audacity to survive the absurd rules that surrounded them. Take the case of Alice Keitler's servant again. While Alice fled, her servant faced trial for alleged witchcraft. Cleverly, she implicated others or presented herself as innocent through manipulation and cunning. This was a survival tactic in a world where accusation could be fatal. Understanding social hierarchies, fear, and superstition was as important as obeying the letter of the law. Some individuals exploited technicalities in sumptuary laws. Clothing rules were strict, but exact wording mattered. A peasant who wanted silk might argue that it was part of an inheritance, a gift, or disguised within other fabrics, technically obeying the law while flaunting authority. The fine print could save lives or at least delay punishment. Medieval rulers tried to regulate fashion, but human ingenuity often found a loophole. Food laws also had exceptions. Eating meat during forbidden periods could be deadly, yet exceptions existed for medical reasons, emergencies, or local permissions. A clever merchant or peasant might invoke illness, scarcity, or necessity to avoid punishment. Knowing when and how to argue for an exception could mean the difference between survival and execution. Superstition-driven laws were full of potential loopholes. Witchcraft accusations often relied on rumor, fear, and subjective interpretation. People learned to exploit this by carefully documenting their innocence, keeping witnesses, or relocating. Knowledge of local customs, influential allies, or religious connections could provide protection. Even when the charges seemed absurd, some towns allowed paid fines in place of harsher punishments. For example, Violating minor public behavior rules, like laughing too loudly or dancing inappropriately, could sometimes be resolved by paying a fine or performing community service. Money didn't always save your life, but it could save your skin or at least delay judgment. Even executions had loopholes. Certain offenses might be punished only if the accused was caught in the act. Sneezing at the wrong time, wearing the wrong color, or leaving a gate open wasn't always fatal. Timing, intent, and witnesses mattered. In a world full of surveillance by neighbors, officials, and superstition, being clever, cautious, and lucky was essential. Marriage laws offered some latitude to couples could sometimes marry with local clerical approval, under special dispensations, or in remote areas, avoiding harsh punishment for social infractions. Understanding local politics, hierarchy, and religious protocols could mean the difference between public shaming and execution. Even animal-related laws had workarounds. If a neighbor's livestock was harmed accidentally, compensation, negotiation, or proving lack of intent could prevent execution. Medieval law wasn't always rigid. Legal skill and clever argumentation could mitigate consequences, especially in cases of property or social disputes. These loopholes revealed that medieval society was both rigid and flexible. The rules were strict, terrifying, and sometimes deadly, but knowledge, cunning, and alliances could save a life. People learned to navigate absurd laws with a mix of obedience, clever argument, and social awareness. Survival depended on wit as much as caution. Of course, not everyone succeeded. Misfortune, bad timing, or unlucky witnesses could still lead to public humiliation, fines, torture, or death. Life was a delicate balance between law, superstition, and strategy. Every sneeze, outfit, laugh, and gesture had to be weighed carefully, at least cleverly explained if questioned. Next, we'll explore the final, strangest, and most shocking medieval laws, the ones that seem almost unbelievable today, but were very real. These last examples will wrap up our journey through a world where absurdity, danger, and creativity intertwined. As we approach the end of our journey through medieval laws, some of the strangest, most shocking, and almost unbelievable examples remain. These are the rules that make you shake your head, laugh nervously, and realize just how bizarre and dangerous life could be in the Middle Ages. One law punished people for failing to maintain their own household gates. Open gates weren't just a minor nuisance, they were seen as invitations for criminals or wild animals. Forgetting to latch a gate could make you legally liable if something went wrong, and in extreme interpretations, this negligence could be punishable by death. A simple oversight could become a fatal error, making everyday life a minefield of potential offenses. Fashion continued to be tightly regulated. Wearing the wrong color, fabric, or style reserved for nobility could result in public punishment or execution. Even accessories were monitored. The message was clear. Social hierarchy wasn't just respected, it was enforced to the point of death. Medieval life required vigilance over wardrobe as much as over actions. Food laws were equally extreme. Eating meat at the wrong time, brewing unauthorized ale, or selling prohibited ingredients could have lethal consequences. Authorities weren't concerned only with morality, they were controlling behavior, enforcing hierarchy, and punishing disobedience with potentially deadly force. One misstep in the kitchen or marketplace could end tragically. Public behavior remained a perilous field. Laugh too loudly, dance incorrectly, or sing the wrong song, and punishment could follow. In some towns, people were executed for dancing in ways deemed immoral or threatening to order. Humor, expression, and entertainment were tightly policed, and authorities didn't hesitate to enforce consequences. Joy, in medieval eyes, had limits and, sometimes fatal ones. Superstition, of course, dominated the landscape. Possessing certain herbs, keeping unusual pets, or engaging in rituals could result in accusations of witchcraft or demonic involvement. Even misfortune like a failed harvest could trigger a search for someone to blame. Medieval law wasn't just about legality, it was about controlling fear, imagination, and uncertainty. Often through lethal means, marriage, love, and social relationships were also fraught with danger. Couples could face punishment for marrying outside their class, living together without permission, or acting against hierarchical norms. Love wasn't just complicated, it could be legally perilous. Every relationship was subject to scrutiny, and breaking invisible rules could result in humiliation, fines, or execution. Animal laws reached peak absurdity in some cases. Harming livestock, cats, or even bees could lead to fines or death, because animals were considered essential to survival. Owners were responsible not only for their own lives but also for the legal status and safety of their creatures. An accidental offense could have catastrophic consequences. Even minor negligence could be fatal. Allowing a fire to spread, failing to secure property, or accidentally harming someone could escalate into execution. Medieval life required constant vigilance, careful planning, and a little luck. One misstep could spiral into disaster. All of these examples show a society obsessed with control, fear, and order, where absurdity and danger were inseparable. Sneezing, dressing in the wrong color, dancing, laughing, or being unlucky could all carry real consequences. Life was unpredictable. Legal systems were creative in their cruelty, and superstition ruled alongside law. As we wrap up this exploration, remember that medieval Europe was not just strange and dark, it was a world where the ordinary became extraordinary, and the mundane could become deadly. The weirdest laws weren't just about enforcement, they were about shaping a society through fear, spectacle, and imagination. Next, we'll move to the final chapter, reflecting on what these laws tell us about medieval life, human nature, and how absurdity, fear, and creativity combined to create a world both fascinating and terrifying. As we reach the end of our journey through the weirdest medieval laws, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on what all of this tells us about life in the Middle Ages, a world where sneezing, laughing, wearing silk, dancing, or simply being unlucky could get you executed. Might seem absurd today, but it was real then. Survival depended on vigilance, cunning, and sometimes sheer luck. Medieval society was built on fear, hierarchy, and superstition. Kings, nobles, and church authorities sought to control every aspect of life, from clothing and diet to gestures, laughter, and even thoughts. Laws weren't just rules. They were tools to maintain social order, reinforce hierarchy, and regulate morality. Breaking them even accidentally could be deadly. Yet amid all this danger and absurdity, human ingenuity shone through. People found loopholes, clever arguments, and creative ways to navigate the system. Merchants disguised silk as gifts, peasants excused themselves during forbidden meals, and some accused of witchcraft cleverly manipulated witnesses or relied on influential allies. Survival wasn't just about obeying rules, it was about understanding a complex, unpredictable world and learning to bend it without breaking. Many of these laws were designed as spectacles, public, dramatic, and terrifying. Executions weren't just punishment. They were a warning, a lesson, and entertainment all at once. Hanging, burning, quartering, and humiliation combined morality with fear. Medieval life was theatrical, and obedience was demanded not only by authority, but by community pressure. Superstition and social norms, absurdity and danger were intertwined. Fashion, food, humor, gestures, and even personal hygiene could all become matters of life or death. Everyday actions were loaded with risk, and misfortune could easily be interpreted as criminal, immoral, or supernatural. In a world governed by fear, imagination, and strict rules, survival required constant awareness. And yet, this strangeness also tells us something enduring about human society. Laws, even the absurd ones, reflect what people feared, valued, and wanted to control. Medieval laws remind us that the ordinary can be dangerous, the mundane can be punished, and human imagination can turn superstition into enforceable rules. They are both darkly humorous and deeply fascinating, offering a window into a world where reality often felt stranger than fiction. So, next time you sneeze in public, wear your favorite color, or dance freely. Be thankful for the freedoms we take for granted. And if you're feeling adventurous, imagine yourself in a medieval town, navigating laws where every laugh, every gesture, and even every thought might just have been a matter of life or death. It's a world that's distant, bizarre, terrifying, and endlessly captivating. With that, our journey through the weirdest medieval laws comes to an end. A world ruled by fear, superstition, and absurdity, but also by ingenuity, resilience, and human creativity. Sleep well tonight, knowing that the worst laws today are far behind us, and let your imagination wander safely through the strange, shadowy streets of medieval Europe.